Welcome. You're here because you want to get a real handle on learning right, to take in information effectively without feeling totally buried or, like you're constantly treading water.
Mhm.
That's exactly what we're diving into today.
That's right. We're pulling apart the insights from Daniel T. Willingham's book, Outsmart Your Brain, Why Learning is Hard and How You Can Make It Easy.
Okay.
Think of this as your personal cheat sheet, really, to understanding how your brain actually works
Yeah.
when you're trying to learn something new,
Right.
and, maybe more importantly, how you can make that whole process much smoother and, well, stickier.
Absolutely. Whether you're facing down like a mountain of lecture notes or endless reading lists,
Yeah.
trying to make sense of a lab experiment or just bracing yourself for exams, you've probably felt that time pressure, right? That feeling of information overload, and you're always hunting for genuinely useful advice.
Mm-hmm.
So our goal today, our mission, is to extract the key principles from Willingham's work and turn them into concrete strategies you can start using right away, those like aha moments that can really change how you learn.
And the fascinating thing Willingham points out right from the start is what he calls the mental equivalent of push-ups on your knees.
Okay. What does he mean by that?
Well, he observes that our brains naturally gravitate towards learning activities that feel easy,
Yeah.
almost automatic.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. So our brain is kind of like someone who wants to exercise, but prefers the exercises that don't really challenge them.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah.
Our brains tend to give us this little reward feeling for things that feel smooth, familiar. But the catch is, often those very activities, like just rereading your notes over and over again,
Yeah, I do that.
we all do. But they aren't the ones that lead to real lasting learning. They might feel like you're being productive,
Right.
but they're not actually pushing your understanding in the ways that build strong memories. So the key insight here is fluency isn't mastery.
Fluency isn't mastery. I like that.
Just because something feels familiar doesn't mean you've actually learned it deeply.
That's a great way to put it. It's like thinking you're getting stronger by lifting, I don't know, really light weights.
Exactly.
It feels easy, but you're not really building muscle.
Spot on. Willingham argues that to become a truly effective learner, you need to kind of outsmart this tendency. You need to actively engage in mental exercises that might feel a little harder at first, the ones that require you to really think and process.
Okay.
Because those are the ones that ultimately lead to better, more durable understanding.
Makes total sense. So, with that in mind, let's get into some specific learning situations. Starting with something almost everyone deals with, learning by listening. Lectures.
Yeah, lectures. What's fascinating here is the mismatch Willingham highlights. It's between how lectures are usually put together and how our brains naturally take in spoken info.
A mismatch. How so?
Well, lectures are often organized, hierarchically, meaning they have a top-down structure, like a main topic,
Yeah.
with supporting ideas underneath.
Right, like an outline, Roman numerals, bullet points, that kind of thing.
Exactly that. But our brains tend to process speech in a more linear way,
Okay.
kind of like a conversation that just unfolds bit by bit. We pick up individual facts and details as they're spoken. The challenge is that listeners often grab these individual pieces, but miss how they all connect,
Ah, okay.
how those bullet points relate back to the main headings,
So we might catch the definition of a key term, but not really get how it fits into the professor's overall argument for the day.
Precisely, yeah. To help bridge this gap, Willingham suggests a few important strategies.
Okay.
The first one is to actively try to identify the top two levels of the lecture's structure.
The top two levels.
Yeah, the main topic or question for that day, and then the key supporting ideas. Sometimes you can get a sense of this from the course syllabus,
Right.
or maybe from the speaker's opening remarks.
Okay, so before the lecture even properly starts, try to get that kind of bird's eye view of what's going to be covered.
Exactly. And then, while you're listening, pay attention to the verbal cues.
Cues. Like what?
Phrases that signal when the speaker's moving to a new point. Like, now let's look at some examples, or the next crucial aspect is.
Oh, okay.
Those can be really useful in helping you map out the lecture's organization in your own mind in real time.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like the speaker is giving you signposts to follow their train of thought. What about when lecturers provide notes, like outlines or copies of their slides? That seems helpful.
It can be, but Willingham emphasizes that these materials should be used to check your own notes.
Okay, check them.
For accuracy,
Yeah.
and maybe to see if you grasp the overall structure. They shouldn't be a substitute for actively taking your own notes.
Why not? Seems easier just to use theirs.
Because the very act of you processing the information and writing it down in your own way, that helps solidify it in your memory. It's active.
Ah, I see. So the provided notes are more of a tool for confirmation, maybe, rather than the main thing you learn from.
Exactly. Now, a question that often comes up is, should you do the assigned reading before or after the lecture?
Yeah, that's a good one. What's the verdict?
Well, Willingham says the crucial thing is to understand what your instructor expects you to have gotten from the reading before you walk into the lecture.
Ah, so it depends on the instructor's plan.
Right. He gives a great example from his own college days, an epic poetry course. The lectures weren't just recapping the plot you'd read.
Okay.
They were focused on giving you the historical and cultural context, stuff not necessarily in the reading itself.
Ah, so the reading laid the groundwork, like the basic story.
Yeah,
And the lecture built a deeper understanding on top of that. Context, meaning.
precisely. And finally, when it comes to asking questions during or after lectures, Willingham advises being, well, strategic. Steer clear of those questions that seem more designed to, show off what you know rather than genuinely seeking clarification.
Okay, yeah. Avoid the show-off question.
Right. Instead, try to make it clear that you've already put some effort into understanding the material first.
Got it. Be mindful of everyone's time and make sure your question is really aimed at improving understanding. For you, and maybe for others too.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about the actual process of taking lecture notes. It can feel like you're trying to catch water in a sieve sometimes. The speaker's going so fast.
It absolutely can feel like that. Willingham highlights that huge difference in speed between speaking and writing. It's physically impossible to write down every single word.
So you just can't.
You can't. Effective note-taking is all about making smart choices about what to capture. It's a balancing act.
So how do we outsmart our brain's instinct to just, try and transcribe everything the professor says?
Well, one really effective approach is to focus on truly understanding what the speaker is saying first,
Okay, understanding.
and then jotting down your own concise summary of the key meaning. Your words, not necessarily trying to get their exact wording down. He shares a great example of, like, a really long-winded explanation being boiled down into just a short, impactful note by a student.
I like that, write what you're thinking. It forces you to actively engage with the information, right? Put it into your own words.
Exactly. It aids processing.
What about the ongoing debate? Taking notes on a laptop versus longhand?
Ah, yes. Both have their pros and cons, definitely.
Okay.
Laptops obviously offer the speed of typing. You can potentially capture more raw information.
True.
However, research suggests that the very speed of typing can tempt you into that verbatim transcription mode.
Ah, the thing we just said isn't ideal.
Right. Which, as we discussed, doesn't necessarily lead to better understanding, but maybe more importantly, the potential for distraction on a laptop.
Oh, yeah. Email, websites.
It's huge, a huge drawback. And Willingham has this fantastic piece of advice here. Do not rely on willpower if you can change the environment instead.
Huh. That's so true. Just turn off the Wi-Fi, maybe?
Exactly. If you can remove the temptation entirely, you're already in a much better position than trying to fight it constantly.
Okay, good advice. What about the actual content of the notes themselves? Any tips for what we should be focusing on writing down?
Absolutely. Willingham really stresses the importance of writing notes for future you.
Future me.
Yeah. Think about it. Those quick abbreviations or like inside references that make perfect sense in the moment, they might be totally confusing weeks later when you're reviewing for an exam.
Yeah, I've definitely had that happen. What did I mean by that?
Exactly. He shares a funny story about finding a note that just said, "Remember the aardvark."
Jackals and R.
And nothing. No context to explain why the aardvark was important.
Oh, no. Future you would be completely lost.
Totally lost. So the point is, make sure you provide enough context and explanation in your notes so they'll actually serve as useful memory prompts later on.
Right. Be kind to future you.
Be kind to future you. He also recommends taking a moment during natural pauses in the lecture, or maybe right after it finishes, to quickly review your notes. Just check for clarity, completeness, while the info is still fresh.
Good tip. Strike while the iron's hot.
And don't get too caught up in trying to implement some super elaborate, rigid note-taking system like Cornell Notes or whatever if it doesn't feel right.
Really?
Yeah, a simple, comfortable format that works for you is usually best. Don't let the system get in the way of the learning.
Okay.
Using abbreviations for frequently used terms that's smart saves time.
Like dev for development or gov for government?
Exactly. Stuff like that. And when it comes to figures or graphs on slides,
Yeah.
focus on capturing the main takeaway message, not necessarily copying the whole complex thing perfectly.
Yeah.
What's the point the instructor is making with it?
Got it. The gist, not every data point.
Right. And finally, he suggests using the margins of your notes
The margins. For what?
for things like self-corrections. Oops, that wasn't right. Or maybe flagging points you're unsure about with a question mark.
No.
Or even jotting down key conclusions or connections. Little symbols can help organize your thoughts visually.
These are all incredibly practical tips.
Mhm.
Really useful for getting the most out of lectures. Okay, let's switch gears now and talk about learning from labs, activities, demonstrations, things that involve more active participation.
Yeah, the hands-on stuff. The crucial thing to understand here, Willingham says, is that these kinds of activities serve a whole range of learning goals.
Okay.
They're not just about presenting information like a lecture might be. They might be designed to teach you a specific process or illustrate a complex idea using an analogy, or maybe help you develop higher-level thinking skills. So your approach to learning from them should really be tailored to the specific purpose of that activity.
That makes sense. I mean, a hands-on science experiment probably has a different learning objective than, say, a quick in-class demo the professor does with a prop.
Precisely. Willingham points out that those brief, often surprising activities frequently serve as analogies.
Analogies.
Yeah, they're designed to help you grasp a difficult or abstract concept by linking it to something you already understand.
Okay, examples.
He gives great ones, like using a pan balance scale to explain the concept of equality, the equal sign in math.
Ah, yeah. Both sides have to be equal.
Right. Or using a spinning bicycle wheel to help visualize angular momentum in physics. You can feel the forces.
Okay, so the familiar object or situation acts as a kind of mental bridge to understanding the new, harder idea.
Exactly. And the key here, he says, is to really focus on the mapping.
The mapping.
Yeah, identifying exactly how the features of the familiar thing, the analogy, relate to the features of the new concept you're trying to learn.
Okay, mapping the connections.
Right. He uses this really clever analogy of the Declaration of Independence as a breakup letter to illustrate this.
That's a breakup letter,
Okay.
seriously.
Yeah, so the mapping would be the American colonies are like the person ending the relationship. Great Britain is the person being broken up with. And the Declaration itself is the actual breakup letter, laying out the reasons,
Wow, that actually makes it really clear and memorable.
doesn't it? And his point is, if you're ever unsure about how the analogy works, how the mapping fits,
Yeah.
don't hesitate to ask the instructor for clarification. How does this part connect to that part?
Right, don't just nod along if the analogy isn't clicking.
Exactly. Now, what about those more structured, sort of step-by-step activities you might encounter, maybe in a lab setting?
Yeah, the ones with the procedures you have to follow.
Those often aim to teach you higher-level thinking skills, things like the scientific method itself.
Okay.
You might be guided through the process of forming a hypothesis, then designing an experiment to test it, and then interpreting the results.
Right.
The danger here, Willingham warns, is just going through the motions, mindlessly following the script
Check boxes, yeah.
without really thinking about the underlying technique or the bigger picture of what you're supposed to be learning from doing it.
So it's easy to miss the forest for the trees.
Very easy. It's really important to clarify the main learning objective with your instructor. What's the big takeaway skill I should be getting from this lab?
So it's not just about getting the right answer at the end of the experiment. It's more about understanding the process of how you arrived at that answer, maybe.
Exactly. That's often the real goal. And when it comes to larger projects, things that are more open-ended, Willingham advises choosing your problem or topic thoughtfully, making sure it's something you can actually tackle.
Right.
Actively seek feedback at different stages. Don't wait until the very end.
Good point. Get course corrections.
Yeah. And then, crucially, take some time after it's completed to reflect on what you learned. Not just the content, but the process.
Okay.
He also draws a really important distinction between simply having experience with something and engaging in deliberate practice.
Experience versus deliberate practice. What's the difference?
Well, just doing something repeatedly, like, say, driving a car for many years or baking the same cake recipe or even typing,
Yeah.
doesn't automatically lead to improvement beyond a certain basic level, does it?
Oh, I guess not. I've been driving for ages. I'm probably not much better than I was 10 years ago.
Right. Deliberate practice, on the other hand, involves setting specific goals for improvement,
Okay.
focusing intensely on the task while you're doing it, getting feedback on your performance from others or self-assessment,
Hmm.
and then repeating the task, but actively reflecting on how to improve further each time. It's much more focused and effortful.
That makes a lot of sense. You have to be intentional about getting better, not just kind of passively going through the motions.
Exactly. Now, some activities, Willingham notes, are primarily about the experience itself, things you can't really get from a book,
Like what?
like maybe going on a police ride-along if you're studying criminology, or visiting a psychiatric ward for psychology students.
Okay. Immersive experiences.
Right. In these cases, he emphasizes the importance of planning what you want to observe beforehand. Don't just show up passively.
Have some goals for observation.
Yeah. And take detailed notes during the experience, even if you think, oh, this is so vivid, I'll definitely remember everything.
Because you probably won't remember the details later.
You really won't.
Wow.
Memory fades. And finally, he encourages learners to provide constructive feedback back to instructors about activities.
Oh, interesting. Tell them what worked or didn't.
Yeah. To help improve their effectiveness for future students, it closes the loop.
It sounds like active engagement and mindful participation are really the keys to unlocking learning from all these different types of activities.
That's a great summary of it, yeah.
Okay, now let's move on to something that really underpins all learning. Memory and organization. How do we make things stick?
Right. This is fundamental. Willingham uses a classic psychology experiment, you might have heard of it, involving word lists and tree diagrams. It really highlights how good organization dramatically boosts memory. People who saw words arranged in logical categories, like animals, furniture, etc., in a tree diagram, they remembered significantly more than people who saw the exact same words just presented randomly or in a jumbled tree.
Wow. So just structuring the information helps that much.
Hugely. Organization creates these mental pathways, these retrieval structures that make recall much, much easier later on.
So structuring information isn't just about making your notes look neat. It's actually about making it easier for our brains to find and retrieve that information later.
Precisely. It's functional. Even creating like silly or nonsensical sentences that link a list of unrelated words together.
Like mnemonics.
Yeah, exactly. That can significantly aid memory just by forging some kind of connection, any link between the items.
Huh.
However, Willingham points out a paradox.
Mm-hmm.
People often don't bother to reorganize their notes, even though they kind of know it would be helpful.
Why not, if it works so well?
Because our brains have this natural preference for novelty. New information grabs our attention.
Okay.
Familiar information, like the notes you just took, it doesn't give you that same dopamine hit. It feels less engaging to go back over it.
That feeling of, yeah, I already looked at this, even when you might not actually remember it very well or haven't processed it deeply.
Exactly that feeling. It's a cognitive bias. To counteract this, he suggests actively reviewing and maybe reorganizing your notes on the same day you take them.
Same day? Why then?
Because the information is still relatively fresh. It's easier to work with, to see the connections, to fill in gaps. Don't let it get cold.
Okay. Review and organize sooner rather than later.
He also highly recommends meeting regularly with study groups.
Study groups, are they really that useful?
Invaluable, according to Willingham, for several reasons. First, you can fill in gaps in your own notes, things you missed.
Right. Compare notes.
Second, you get to see how others have organized the same information. That can give you new perspectives, new ways to structure it in your own mind. It challenges your own organization.
Okay. At different angles.
Yeah, and it forces you to explain things, which is a great way to test your own understanding.
Good point. And what about asking the instructor for help?
When you do go for help, try to ask focused questions. Questions that show you've already put in the effort to grapple with the material yourself, not just, I don't get it.
Right. More like, I understand this part, but I'm getting stuck when I try to connect it to that part.
Exactly. It helps the instructor pinpoint where you need help, and it shows you're engaged.
So it seems like actively working with the information, organizing it, discussing it, questioning it, and collaborating with others are all crucial for making things actually stick in your memory.
That's the core message, yeah. Memory isn't passive storage. It's built through active processing.
Okay, let's tackle another fundamental aspect of learning, reading, especially academic reading.
Right. And Willingham highlights a really common but inaccurate assumption here.
Which is?
That reading to learn is basically the same thing as reading for pleasure, like reading a novel.
It feels different, but maybe we don't always act like it is.
Exactly. Our brains have this natural tendency, when faced with text, to just read passively. Let the eyes scan the words,
Yeah.
which can lead to us missing the crucial connections between ideas that the author is actually trying to convey. We get the words, maybe, but not the structure of the argument.
It's easy to just let your eyes glide over the page without really engaging deeply with the meaning or thinking about how sentence B relates to sentence A or paragraph 2 builds on paragraph 1.
Absolutely. And this leads to a surprisingly ineffective strategy that so many students rely on.
Let me guess. Highlighting.
You got it, just highlighting text as you read.
But that feels so productive, makes the page look like you did something.
It does feel productive, that's the trap again. But Willingham explained why it's often not very effective on its own.
Okay, why?
Well, first, highlighting doesn't necessarily force you to actively connect the meaning across different sentences or paragraphs. You're just marking isolated phrases.
Right. Doesn't build the big picture.
Exactly. And second, your judgment of what's actually important enough to highlight might not be very good, especially if you're new to the subject matter.
Mm-hmm. How do you know what's key if you don't understand the topic yet?
Right. He even mentions a study that found very little overlap in what different students highlighted in the exact same textbook chapter. They were all highlighting different things.
That's really interesting. So just coloring the page yellow or pink isn't a foolproof learning technique.
Yeah.
Shocker.
Chuckles, not at all. So instead, Willingham introduces, or rather reminds us, of methods like the SQ3R reading method.
SQ3R, what's that stand for again?
Survey, question, read, recite, and review.
Okay.
The core idea behind SQ3R and other similar strategies he mentions, like KWL, know, want to know, learn it, or SOR, select, organize, associate, regulate, is that they encourage you to be active from the start. You set goals for your reading before you even begin. That's the survey and question part.
Mm-hmm.
And then you actively think about and connect the ideas as you read. And importantly, you test yourself afterwards, the recite and review parts.
So it builds in that active processing and self-testing.
Exactly. The main point is that careful, effective reading for learning requires focused time and significant mental effort. It's work.
Yeah.
And it should engage those key principles of memory we talked about. Actively thinking about the meaning, organizing the information in your mind as you go, and regularly trying to recall what you've read. Retrieval practice.
Okay.
Passive rereading, just running your eyes over it again and again.
Which is what many people do.
Yeah, it's common because it feels easy, but it's often not a very effective use of your study time compared to these more active strategies.
So reading to learn should be more like an active quest for understanding and connection, not just a passive intake of words on a page.
That's a perfect way to put it, an active quest.
All right. Now let's face a reality that many learners find, well, pretty daunting. Preparing for and taking tests. Exams.
Yeah, the moment of truth for many students, right? This is a really critical area where applying the right strategies can make a huge difference.
So what's the best way to prepare, according to Willingham?
He strongly recommends creating your own comprehensive study guide.
My own. Not just using one someone else made.
Definitely create your own. Think of it like making your own set of flashcards or maybe a really detailed outline, something that covers all the important material from both your lectures and your readings. It's the active creation that helps you learn.
Okay, creating it is part of the learning. Makes sense. What should be in it?
He emphasizes posing questions to yourself at multiple levels of understanding.
Multiple levels.
Like not just basic recall of facts, what is the definition of X, but also questions that push for more complex conceptual understanding. Why is X important? Or how does X relate to Y? And even application, how can I use X to solve this kind of problem?
Okay, so not just asking what, but also why and how.
Yeah.
Questions, deeper processing.
Exactly. And he cautions against relying too heavily on what he calls found materials, like those pre-made outlines you can find online, or someone else's flashcards.
Why not? Seems like a time saver.
Because you miss out on that crucial active learning step that happens when you grapple with the material yourself to decide what's important and how to phrase the question and answer. You're bypassing the processing.
Ah, okay. The effort involved in making it is the learning.
A big part of it, yes. He also suggests adding why or how, links or connections within your questions and answers. So don't just memorize that A leads to B, understand why A leads to B.
Deeper connections again.
Using mnemonic techniques, imagery, stories, mental walks can be helpful for pure memorization aspects, even drawing little pictures or diagrams.
Okay.
And crucially, practice answering your questions. Don't just read them. Say the answer out loud, as if you were explaining the concepts to someone else.
Like teaching it.
It's exactly like teaching it. And give yourself immediate corrective feedback. If you get it wrong, figure out why right away.
Okay. And how should you practice? Just go through the cards.
Self-testing is key. But he stresses doing it in a random order. Shuffle those flashcards.
Why random?
To simulate the conditions of the actual test, where questions won't necessarily be in the order you learned them. It forces more flexible retrieval.
Avoids just learning the sequence. Good point. So the message is, the very act of building and actively using your own study guide is a primary way you learn the material.
Yes, it becomes your main learning tool, not just a review sheet.
What about studying with others? You mentioned study groups earlier. How do they fit in here?
Study groups can be incredibly valuable for test prep, too.
Mm-hmm.
Different people will often pick up on different nuances or have different perspectives,
Right.
which helps you identify information you might have missed or concepts you haven't fully grasped. They can fill your blind spots. They can also expose you to different ways of phrasing questions about the same material, which can deepen your understanding and prepare you better for how questions might appear on the actual test.
Makes sense. What about the timing? When should we study? The age-old cramming debate.
Yes, cramming. Willingham clearly contrasts space practice, studying the material across multiple days or weeks, revisiting it periodically with cramming, pulling an all-nighter right before the exam.
And the winner is?
Space practice, hands down. For long-term memory, it's far superior.
Even though cramming feels like it works sometimes?
Exactly. Cramming might feel more effective because the information is fresh right then, and you might even do okay on the test the next day. But that knowledge is fragile. It fades much more quickly than knowledge built up through spaced repetition.
Okay, so space practice builds more durable memories. That makes a lot of intuitive sense. Giving your brain time to process and consolidate the information over time seems key.
It really is. Sleep plays a big role in that consolidation, too.
Right. Now, what about the test itself? Any strategies for actually navigating those often stressful situations?
Yeah, definitely. First, understanding what the exam question is actually asking is fundamental. Sounds obvious, but
But it's easy to misread or misunderstand under pressure.
totally. Willingham explains how seemingly straightforward problems can be missed because of misleading cues in the question that accidentally trigger irrelevant knowledge you have.
Like a distractor.
Yeah. Or it makes you think of the wrong concept. He suggests that for multi-step problems, try breaking them down and maybe even labeling the different sub-goals.
Okay, like step 1, find X. Step 2, use X to calculate Y.
Exactly. It helps you focus on the underlying principles and the process, rather than getting lost in the details. He uses a great analogy about learning to create a Google Calendar event. You need to understand the general principle of setting up an event, not just memorize the exact clicks for one specific instance.
So focus on the general method, not just the surface features of this particular problem.
Right. Now, when you're trying to judge how well you actually know the material during studying, this is tricky.
Yeah, how do you know if you really know it?
It's important to distinguish between performance, which is your ability to recall something immediately after studying when it's fresh, and true learning, which is the ability to reliably access that information in different contexts and over time, like on the test day or even weeks later.
Performance versus learning, that's a key distinction.
It is. And one way to get a more accurate sense of your learning during self-testing is to practice articulating your answers fully, out loud. Don't just glance at your flashcard and think, yeah, I know that. Force yourself to explain it.
Because actually saying it reveals the gaps.
It really does. He tells an anecdote about a student who thought they knew everything about forgetting but couldn't actually explain the mechanisms when asked directly.
Ouch.
And related to this is the concept of overlearning.
Overlearning. What's that? It sounds tiring.
It means continuing to study or practice something even after you feel like you've mastered it, even after you get it right consistently.
Why would you do that? Seems like a waste of time if you already know it.
Because it's really important for combating forgetting. It strengthens the memory traces further, making them much more resistant to decay over time. Even though it feels pointless or boring at that stage, it pays off.
Okay, so don't stop studying as soon as you get it right a couple of times. keep practicing beyond mastery to really solidify that knowledge.
Exactly. It builds resilience.
What about during the actual test? Any specific tips for managing anxiety or tackling questions?
Yeah, he addresses test anxiety, which is obviously huge for many people. He suggests practical things like reducing caffeine intake beforehand, maybe finding a quiet space or using earplugs if noise bothers you.
Okay.
Interestingly, he advises against consciously trying to visualize your study environment during the test.
Really? I've heard people say you should do that, like picture where you learned it.
Yeah, but Willingham argues it can sometimes hinder recall by linking your memories too strongly to that specific context. You want the knowledge to be accessible more generally.
Huh. Okay. Good to know.
And a classic tip, don't get stuck for too long on a single difficult question. Flag it, move on, come back to it later if you have time. Better to bank the points on the easier ones first.
Right. Maximize your score.
And be wary of any of those dubious test-taking tricks that promise you'll get the answers without actually knowing the content. They usually don't work.
Focus on knowing the material.
Focus on the material.
Mm.
For essay questions, he stresses the importance of outlining first. Take a few minutes, plan your main points, know what your conclusion will be before you start writing.
Don't just dive in and hope for the best.
No. And then focus on clear, well-organized writing. Structure matters.
Solid, practical advice for getting through exams. Okay, and what about what you do after the test is over? The post-game analysis, so to speak. Is that important?
Oh, incredibly valuable as a learning opportunity, Willingham says. Don't just look at the grade and move on.
Okay, what should we do?
Take some time to really reflect on what went wrong, if anything.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, were there actual gaps in my notes or my study guide? Did I just not memorize the information well enough? Or did I struggle specifically with applying the concepts to new problems?
Trying to diagnose the type of error.
Exactly. If you got specific questions wrong, try to understand your thought process at the time. Where did you go astray? Reconstruct your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
For essay questions, consider different possibilities. Did you miss key content? Was the instructor maybe looking for a specific perspective you didn't address? Did your essay kind of wander off topic? Or was the writing itself maybe unclear or disorganized?
Lots of potential issues there.
Yeah. And be aware that sometimes questions might feel like trick questions.
Trick questions. Do teachers really do that?
Well, sometimes they might rely on a common misconception, or maybe it require you to distinguish between formal knowledge and just everyday pop knowledge. He gives examples like a riddle about a sinking rowboat, or knowing the difference between romantic painters and painters from the Romantic era.
Ah, subtleties. Or knowing the difference between a metaphor and a literal statement, like the curtain of night.
Exactly. Things that test careful reading and precise understanding. But importantly, don't just focus on what went wrong.
Okay.
Also, take note of what you did well on the test. Acknowledge your successes. It helps build your confidence and reinforces your understanding of those areas where you were strong.
Good point. Balance the critique with recognizing strengths.
Yeah. And try not to just cringe or be overly negative or beat yourself up about mistakes or failures. Frame it as information for improvement.
It's all about extracting lessons from the experience, right? Both the successes and the failures, to learn better next time.
That's the goal. Continuous improvement.
Okay, now let's move on to some really crucial, perhaps more foundational aspects. Motivation, setting effective goals, and tackling that beast procrastination.
Absolutely foundational. Willingham starts by challenging the common, often harmful idea of fixed intelligence.
The idea that you're either smart or you're not.
Exactly. He emphasizes that your knowledge and abilities are not set in stone. They're changeable and can be significantly improved through dedicated learning and effective strategies. He uses a chess player analogy. Grandmasters aren't born. They develop expertise through massive amounts of practice.
So intelligence is malleable. That's empowering.
Very. He also highlights the incredibly strong connection between getting enough sleep and effective learning. Sleep is when a lot of memory consolidation happens.
Right, we mentioned that briefly.
Yeah, and he provides useful, practical tips for improving your sleep habits, like having a consistent wake-up time, or relaxing nighttime routine, managing light exposure, etc. Things we can control.
Okay, sleep is non-negotiable for learning. What about managing time?
Huge. He stresses planning consistent, dedicated time for learning. Actually scheduling it in.
Like appointments with yourself.
Kind of, yeah. Scheduling specific blocks of time for studying, rather than just vaguely thinking about upcoming deadlines or relying on finding time. This proactive scheduling is essential for avoiding that last-minute cramming, which we know isn't ideal, and also avoids understudying.
Right. Makes learning a regular habit.
Exactly. He recommends using a calendar, digital or paper, whatever works, to manage your time effectively. And for each study session, create a to-do list.
A to-do list for the session.
Yeah, but with concrete, manageable tasks. Things you can realistically accomplish in, say, 20 to 60 minutes, not just study Chapter 5, more like read Section 5.1 and make summary notes or do 10 practice problems for Concept X.
Breaking it down makes it less daunting.
Much less. So proactively managing your time and making learning a regular, structured part of your schedule is key.
Got it. What about those bigger, longer-term goals, career goals, learning goals beyond just this class?
Setting and, importantly, regularly revisiting your long-term learning and career goals is really important for sustained motivation. It reminds you why you're doing this.
Okay. How should we set those goals?
Willingham suggests focusing on your sense of purpose rather than just fleeting passions. What gives you meaning?
Purpose over passion.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Also, be aware of how your environment and the people around you influence your goals. Are they supporting your aspirations? And try to minimize emotional biases when setting goals. He suggests a technique like imagining you're giving advice to a friend in your situation. What would you tell them? It creates distance.
That's a clever trick. Takes the personal pressure off a bit.
Again. And once you have your goals, don't just leave them vague. Develop a concrete plan for achieving them.
Okay, how?
By identifying the specific steps you need to take. What are the milestones? Then anticipate potential obstacles that might crop up along the way.
Be realistic about challenges.
Yes. And crucially, create action plans for how you'll overcome those obstacles when or if they arise. If X happens, then I will do Y.
Wow, that sounds like a very intentional and thoughtful approach to shaping your learning journey over time. Very proactive.
It really is. It's about taking control.
Now, let's talk about procrastination. The elephant in the room for almost every learner at some point. How do we actually get things done when we really, really don't feel like it?
Chuckles. Yeah, the eternal struggle. Willingham explains the psychology behind it really well. Procrastination often stems from our tendency to prioritize immediate pleasure or relief.
Checking social media, watching one more episode.
Exactly. We prioritize that over a future benefit, like getting a good grade or finishing a project. And the future pain of not doing it often feels weaker, less motivating than the immediate pleasure of avoiding it.
So our brains are kind of wired for immediate gratification.
In many ways, yes. And because of that, he emphasizes that simply relying on willpower to overcome procrastination is often not very effective. Willpower is a limited resource.
Okay, so just try harder isn't the best advice.
Often not sustainable. Instead, he suggests focusing on building positive habits. Make your study sessions a regular, almost automatic part of your routine, like brushing your teeth. Reduce the decision-making friction.
Make it routine. Okay, what else?
Break down those large, daunting tasks into smaller, more manageable steps. Write the whole paper feels overwhelming. Write the introduction paragraph feels doable.
Chunking it down.
Yes. Try reframing the task in your mind to focus on the more appealing aspects if possible. What part of this is interesting?
Find the hook.
Yeah. And sometimes, honestly, you just need to force yourself to just start for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Often, that initial inertia is the hardest part to overcome. Once you're started, it's easier to keep going.
The just start technique, I've heard that one.
It works surprisingly often. Having accountability can also be really helpful.
How so?
Telling someone else your plans, like a study group buddy,
Yeah.
or making your goals public in some way, knowing someone else might check in can be motivating.
Right, social pressure in a good way.
Yeah, and seeking social support from others who are also working towards goals. Misery loves company, but so does motivation.
True.
Also, be aware that sometimes procrastination can take the form of self-handicapping.
Self-handicapping, what's that?
That's when you deliberately do things that might hinder your performance, like staying out late the night before an exam, so that if you don't succeed, you have a built-in excuse. It protects your self-esteem. I failed because I was tired, not because I wasn't capable.
Ah, okay. Procrastination as a defense mechanism.
It can be.
Yeah.
And finally, a useful practical strategy.
Yeah.
Make those tempting distractions, social media, games, TV, a reward that you only allow yourself after you've completed a certain amount of work.
Earn your distractions.
Exactly. Use them strategically.
So it sounds like the key is creating an environment and a set of habits and mental tricks that make it easier to do the work rather than just trying to grit your teeth and power through it with willpower alone.
That's a great way to summarize it. Work with your psychology. Don't just fight it head on.
Okay. Finally, let's talk about staying focused. In our current world, with phones buzzing and notifications popping up constantly, this is a major challenge for many learners. How do we concentrate?
Huge challenge. Willingham identifies two main culprits when it comes to a lack of focus during learning. Any guesses?
My phone and my own thoughts.
Pretty much. External distractions in your environment and your own internal mind wandering.
Okay, so external distractions first. The phone, the notifications.
Choosing your study or work location carefully is crucial. Minimize the potential for those external interruptions. Maybe that means the library, maybe a quiet room, maybe using noise-canceling headphones. Find what works.
Turn off notifications, put the phone away.
Definitely. He also points out the often underestimated cognitive cost of multitasking, especially when it involves media multitasking, trying to study while also texting, scrolling, maybe listening to music.
Right. Does music count as a distraction?
Yeah.
I like studying with music.
Music is complex. He notes it can have both distracting effects, especially if it has lyrics or is very engaging, and potentially energizing or mood-boosting effects for some people. It's very individual. You need to figure out if it's helping or hurting your focus.
Okay, experiment required. What about the internal stuff? Mind wandering. My brain just goes off on tangents.
Super common. Strategies here include, first, actively reevaluating the importance of the distracting thought when it pops up. Is it really something you need to think about right now? Often it isn't. Postpone it.
Yeah. He also mentions using third-person self-talk, like, okay, Dave is getting distracted now, let's get back to the reading, which sounds a bit weird.
Chuckles. Yeah, a little.
But research suggests that little bit of psychological distance can actually help you regain control over your attention.
Huh. Interesting. Worth a try.
For the social media urge, he suggests experimenting with tracking how much you actually enjoy it versus just feeling the compulsive wanting to check it. Sometimes realizing it's not actually that rewarding can reduce its pull. The enjoyment versus wanting test. Okay.
And, more broadly, things like getting good sleep, eating nutritious food, and practicing mindfulness meditation have all been shown to be beneficial for reducing overall mind-wandering tendencies.
So general well-being supports focus.
Absolutely. Remember to schedule planned breaks too. Trying to focus intensely for hours on end isn't sustainable. Short, planned breaks can actually boost overall productivity.
Okay. Work in focus bursts, then break.
Yeah. And if you get really stuck on a specific problem and your mind just keeps spinning or wandering, sometimes the best thing is to switch to a different task for a while. Or deliberately try approaching the difficult problem in a completely new way to break the mental logjam.
Don't just keep banging your head against the same wall.
Exactly. Sometimes a change of perspective is all you need.
It sounds like focus requires a multifaceted approach, managing the environment, managing your thoughts, taking care of yourself, and knowing when to switch gears.
That's a good way to put it. It's an active skill to cultivate.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. This has been incredibly rich. Do you have any final thoughts on maybe the bigger picture, the overall journey of becoming a more effective learner?
Well, Willingham wraps up by emphasizing the importance of developing a positive academic self-image. How you see yourself as a learner really matters.
Okay. How is that shaped?
It's shaped by a few things.
Yeah.
The feedback you receive from teachers, tests, etc., your social relationships, do your friends value learning, how you compare yourself to others, and your own underlying values. He encourages readers to try and rethink their definition of what makes a good learner. Move beyond the limiting idea that it's just about innate talent or being smart. Focus on effort, strategy use, resilience.
Growth mindset stuff.
Exactly. Seek out and connect with others who also value learning. That social support and a shared norm can be really encouraging.
Right. Your peer group matters.
Definitely. And try to compare your current progress to where you were in the past, your own personal growth, rather than constantly comparing yourself sideways to others, which can be demoralizing.
Compare you to you. I like that.
Yeah. If you didn't happen to receive practical learning advice growing up, maybe from family, he says to actively seek it out now. From books like his, from academic support centers, from mentors, it's learnable. Value the effort you put in and the learning process itself, not just the final outcomes or grades. And take some time to honestly identify your own specific academic strengths and weaknesses. What are you good at? Where do you need to improve your strategy?
Self-awareness.
Crucial. And finally, learn healthy ways to cope with the inevitable anxiety that comes with learning and being evaluated.
Anxiety is a big one.
Huge. He explains how it can get triggered by negative past associations, how it escalates through threat monitoring, but importantly, how you can learn to reinterpret anxious thoughts. Define progress not as eliminating anxiety entirely, but as being able to do what you want and need to do, even with the anxiety present.
Managing it, not eliminating it.
Exactly. Focus on your own personal growth. Recognize that anxious thoughts are just thoughts, often unlikely ones. Don't suppress them, but evaluate them, and then re-engage with the task. He suggests tools like mindfulness meditation as well.
Okay.
Ultimately, he argues, the goal is to cultivate yourself into an independent learner, not just someone who knows how to learn effectively when they have to for a course, but someone who actively chooses what to learn, driven by their own intellectual curiosity and desire for growth throughout their lives.
Yeah.
That requires that intellectual openness.
Wow. From managing lectures to becoming a lifelong independent learner, that's quite a journey.
It is indeed.
This has been an incredibly valuable deep dive into Daniel Willingham's Outsmart Your Brain. It's just so clear, listening to all this, that effective learning isn't just about putting in the hours, is it?
No, not at all.
It's really about understanding how your brain functions, its quirks, its tendencies, its strengths, and then applying specific, targeted strategies to every aspect of the learning process, from actively listening in lectures, to organizing your notes, to reading effectively, preparing for exams, staying motivated, all of it.
And as we've discussed throughout, these strategies often require conscious effort. They might feel a little different, maybe even counterintuitive or harder at first compared to just passively rereading or highlighting.
Right. The push-ups on your knees feel easier.
Exactly. But the long-term rewards in terms of deeper understanding, better retention, more confidence, and honestly, feeling less overwhelmed by it, all those rewards are truly significant.
Absolutely. You listening right now, you now have this fantastic collection of actionable insights that you can start using right away. We really hope this deep dive has given you a shortcut to becoming not only more well-informed about learning itself, but also, and perhaps more importantly, a much more effective and confident learner in whatever you're tackling.
So here's maybe a final thought for you to consider as you go. Take a moment right now, or later today, to think about the specific strategies we've explored. Identify just one, or maybe two.
Okay.
One or two that really stood out to you, that resonated, and that you think you can immediately start to implement in your current learning endeavors, whatever they might be.
Just start with one small change.
Yeah. And reflect a little on how this understanding of the psychology of learning, knowing why these strategies work, can empower you to take greater control of your own intellectual growth. It's not magic, it's science you can apply.
That's a great takeaway. And if you're eager to dive even deeper into all these topics, we highly recommend checking out Daniel Willingham's book, Outsmart Your Brain, for even more detailed guidance and tons of examples.
Definitely worth the read. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.